Welcome to Doctoral Residency. I'm Dr. Joel Domingo here in the School of Applied Leadership, and this presentation is the overview of the purpose statement and the research questions. Here in this session, we're going to review the connection between the problem statement specifically, and the purpose statement. We'll organize our research methodology ideas, and then we'll evaluate alignment amongst the problem, purpose, and the research questions. So this is going to be important because I think what we're talking about here, and we stressed this earlier, is this idea of alignment. So we're going to dig specifically into this idea of alignment and look at specific examples. So I have this quote here that good questions are better than bad answers. This section of the dissertation, this part of the dissertation, is critical because we want to ask the right questions. And so in order to get to that, let me take you back to this idea of basic versus applied research. Now, basic research is generating new knowledge to advance the field, whereas applied research, this is the research that we do here at CITYU, it's generating and applying new knowledge in pursuit of a solution to a problem in your field or in the field. So again, basic research in some ways creates knowledge. This is great. Whereas applied research solves a problem. It creates knowledge, but it also solves a problem in the field. So there's some of the opinion that applied research in a step is harder because it not only creates the knowledge, but it has to apply it to a context, to a setting. Now, what I want to propose or present to you is a thing called the research triangle. And this is a way to think about narrowing down your problem. So the biggest issue that we see with dissertation students is that students are still too broad. So I want to study this aspect of education, or I want to study leadership in business, or I want to study marketing. Well, okay, that's great, but that's still way too broad. I've asked this of other institutions too, and other dissertation chairs at other institutions. I asked them, what's the one problem that you see with most dissertation students? They laugh. They tell me they need to narrow down their problem. That is the entire key to the dissertation. Now you're studying a small aspect of one thing. So you're not, for example, going to study the ocean. You're going to study a drop in the ocean. And what is that one drop doing? How does it affect the weather? Something so small, so focused, so pointed. This gives you an example. The research triangle is a way to narrow your subject down, way to narrow your ideas down. And you see at the top of the triangle, it's an inverted triangle, take the word pollution. Okay, that's way too broad. I want to study pollution. That's great. There's many forms of pollution. So let's narrow it down further. I want to study air pollution. Okay, that's better. What about air pollution? There's causes, there is the effects, there is the chemistry behind it. Okay, what about the causes of air pollution? At this point, this is where students think, okay, I've got my dissertation topic. I'm going to study the causes of air pollution. No, that's still too broad. Let's go even further. The effects of aerosol products on air pollution. That's even getting down into more minutia. But you see how everything's aligned? You're still studying pollution, you're still studying air pollution and the causes, but you're studying a specific context, an aerosol product. Now, if you want to go even further, think about what would you do? I'm going to study this company's effects on air pollution, this specific product, and why leaders propose this product, for example. I don't know. So again, this is just a way to narrow down your topic, narrow down your ideas. Try this. Here's another one. Distance learning, the topic. So the research problem is there's a lack of students in distance classes. Well, that's great, but that's still too broad. Let's narrow it down to the purpose statement. To what to study why students do not attend distance education classes at a community college. And finally, the research question, does the use of website technology in the classroom deter students from enrolling in a distance education class? So this triangle here is a little different from the previous one in that the previous one's more conceptual. This gets it down to the actual working of the topic, the research problem, the purpose statement, and the research questions. So you see there's alignment throughout. Okay? So again, I encourage you, if you want, feel free to pause this slide at any point and study it, take a look, and look at the alignment on the right-hand side with the alignment of those things on the left. Now, how do you actually formulate your ideas? You know, research is one of these things that early on students, they discover the research databases, ProQuest, ERIC, EBSCO, whatnot, Business Complete, whatever, all those different databases. And how do you make sense of so much research? And I know the library has some great resources in order to do that. And again, I encourage you to take a look at some of their site to do that. But in the flow of ideas, you see on the left-hand side, you have your topic, which is the research or subject area. And let's say it's an educational issue. Maybe the educational issue is it a problem? Maybe it's a concern. Maybe it's something that needs a solution. Okay, so what about evidence? Where's the evidence? Again, we talked about citations and the problem being a problem that is based in the literature, not your opinion that it's a problem, but is there evidence from the literature that this is an issue? As you go further and explore the research, you're going to find deficiencies in the evidence. So the key to these two boxes is that in order to know deficiencies in the evidence, you need to know what the evidence is. So deficiencies in the evidence is there's something missing. What do we need to know more about? When you studied, let's say, the achievement gap in fifth graders, well, this study did not address fifth graders who are right-handed, for example. That's interesting. It seems that all the studies seem to lean toward a certain perspective. How come another perspective wasn't used? So as you read more research, you'll see where the gaps are. That's important because this leads you toward what remedying the deficiencies will do for the audience. How will addressing your problem help you? How will it help researchers? How will it help educators? How will it help policymakers? What about individuals, those in the study? Remember the significance of the study? Think of it at that way. So the flow of ideas is thinking, this is just conceptual. How do you think about your ideas as you read mounds and mounds of research? Where it comes to a head is the problem statement. Now remember, the problem statement is a clear problem in your field as evidenced by the literature. It's not a problem that you think it's a problem. The problem's also succinct. It's not too large. You can't save the world. The problem is world hunger. It is a problem, but that's too large. It's also not too small. The problem is, it's 5 English-speaking left-handed employees at the JLD company. That's way too small. It's got to be a problem that's impacting industry, for example. Maybe it's impacting a school district. Maybe it's impacting a business or a line of business. So it's got to be somewhere not too large and somewhere not too small, but it should also be unique, meaningful, and dissertation worthy. Now, what does dissertation worthy means? Dissertation worthy is something that is debated, but dissertation worthy is something that can be generalized to the larger population, perhaps. Maybe it's something that helps solve a significant problem. Maybe it's something that would be used by researchers in the future. Your study can be used by researchers in the future to study another thing. I'll give you an example here. We had a student who recently did a dissertation on alumni giving. And alumni giving, it's a great topic, but that was too broad. So he eventually narrowed it down to finding out, doing a grounded theory of alumni giving looking at a specific university and forming a model for that. So the hope is that researchers and other development officers can look at this research and apply it. Maybe this is something that they would institute. So that's what dissertation worthy means. So this is something you and your chair would talk about. So there's no right or wrong answer to it. Just know that your chair also has a good sense for what is dissertation worthy because they did one themselves. Okay, now let's talk about a good problem statement. Once you come up with a good problem statement, you need to think about these things. What's the scope of the problem? In other words, what's the context? What's the background where the problem exists? So we talked earlier in a previous presentation about the general problem and then the specific problem. Well, the specific problem is really the scope, but the scope is also the general problem. Where does this exist? Does this exist only in one classroom? Does it exist in a school? Does it exist in a business, an organization? Who will be impacted by it? Who's the audience that's impacted by this problem? You got to think about that thing. Think about the specific leadership or business issue. This is the application. Why is this going to be applicable for business? Why is this going to be applicable for leadership? So in the dissertation checklist, there is a section linked to leadership. So if that's not there, it's not a dissertation that's dissertation worthy according to us, but it doesn't meet this criteria of a good problem statement. So think about all these different issues when you're coming up with your problem statement. An easy way to do this is just write the words, the problem is, and then just start thinking through these things. And then put scope, audience, application. So if you do that, that might work as a little method for helping you think through the problem statement. Now, this dance of problem statement, going back to the problem and purpose statement to the research questions, it's like an upside down dance, a tree. So you start with your problem, you go to the literature, you go back and forth, swinging like a pendulum. So you see the green lines here, you start at one, you go to the literature, and then you go back to the purpose problem, you go back to the literature, you go back to the problem, you go to the literature, the problem. Each time you go back and forth to the literature, what's happening is you're narrowing down your problem, you're narrowing down the purpose to where you come up with the research question. That's what this graphic represents. So it's this dance going back and forth between the problem, purpose, and the literature. Back and forth you go until you narrow it down to your actual problem statement to where you have research questions. All right, so what about this purpose statement? The purpose statement is why you are doing the study. And the purpose of the study is to. So I've seen that a lot on dissertations, and that's fine. The purpose of the study is to blank. It's to identify, explore, understand. Is it to identify a relationship, an association, or prediction? Perhaps it's to establish a cause and effect, or assess an impact, or a level of effectiveness. Answer this question: how will the study address the problem? By addressing this problem, by doing this study, this will help leaders institute better practices in their company. Okay, that's good. So again, this is all review. We covered this earlier in the problem statement, but we're going to tie it together here. So a good question in the purpose statement is, what's the focus of interest? Why is this interesting? What are we going to learn as a result of what this problem will solve? Or solving. What are we going to learn from solving this problem? How will we know that your results will be of value, and who will benefit? This is part of the dissertation worthy things, is ask all these questions when you're doing your research. Okay? So your purpose statement here, the purpose should be clear, it should be focused, it should be concise, and it should be researchable. So it should be clear in that it should not be muddied, it should be focused, that it can't save the world, but it is something that is specific. It's also concise. We talked about academic writing, and I know we'll reinforce this whole piece of academic writing, and it's plain, it's easy to understand, it's right before you. And the other thing, that it's researchable. I know dissertation students have this desire to save the world, and that's great, but you want to finish. We have this maxim that you've heard: the best dissertation is a done dissertation, and there's only two kinds: bad and incomplete. So, which dissertation do you want to be? You want to finish your dissertation. I had a student who was looking to do this research on some online distance learning and wanted to look at online distance learning in another country, and that's great, interesting, but how are you going to get the data? And are you going to be able to go back and forth to this country and finish it on time? So, save that for when you get your doctorate. Then you can do that. But what we want you to do is we want you to finish. It's critical to finish the dissertation more so than to have an incredible dissertation. Now, if you have an incredible dissertation, obviously, and you finish it, even better. But it's more important to finish. I have a little framework here, fill in the blank, that you can try when you're aligning your purpose statement and problem statement. So the purpose statement is built upon the foundation of the problem statement. So here's what I want you to do. Take a look at this and look at the blank, and you can use this pattern for your dissertation as well. You probably want to say it a little more eloquently, but the problem is X. So we talked about the problem statement, so the problem is so on and so forth. The purpose of this study is to identify, to explore, use the verb, put the verb, in order to address the problem so that this group will benefit. The problem is that leaders at XYZ Corporation have not instituted the right training program to effectively, so that the staff workers are effectively doing their job. Okay, leaders haven't instituted their training program, so staff is not effectively doing their job. The purpose is to explore the motivations that leaders have taken in order to institute this, to address this problem of ineffective implementation, so that this organization will benefit. So you figure it out. I encourage you to cut and paste this, try it, and let's see that. I know we're going to do some of this later on in the other residencies, but this is a good practice now to think about how you align the purpose and problem statement together. Now here's an example. Connecting the problem with the purpose statement. The problem is that 8th grade students in the Gotham City School District are performing below the statewide standard on the math portion of the standardized state exam, as evidenced by blah, 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 so on and so forth. The purpose of this qualitative study is to assess the effectiveness of an alternative process to teach math to 8th grade graders in Gotham City and determine whether it is associated with increased performance on statewide standardized exams. So you see, you're getting to the problem, but the purpose is to address this problem. It's subtle. It's not what you learn about the problem, it's what you learn from the solution that matters. Okay? That's what's key here. That's how you align it. It's not knowing more about the problem. It's learning what happens when you intervene or you solve something, that's what matters. This leads you toward the research questions. The research questions can be quantitative or qualitative. In quantitative, you have hypotheses and variables, whereas the qualitative, you have the qualities, the relationships, the qualities that are discovered. In mixed methods, you have both of them together. Whatever you choose, the methods are driven by the problem. Again, I want to say that again. Whatever you choose, the method you choose in your research question is going to be driven by the problem. So, let me say in terms of mixed methods, one of the things with mixed methods is that it takes a little bit longer, but it's a great way of doing things. You have to be both quantitative and qualitative. But know that any sort of methodology you use is fine. Just know that it has to be driven by the problem. And remember, your research question, the questions you ask of research, that is not the problem. Okay? That's different. The research question is different from the problem. It aligns with your problem, but it is not your problem. Now, research questions, what are they for? What questions will your study ask that relate to your problem? What will your research answer? So the number one problem with the number one issue, if you will, of research questions is that there's no way to answer them. They're too subjective. They should be clear, they should be objective, and point out how the questions will be answered. And we'll give you some examples of this, but I want you to just know that research questions, it's hard to say, what's my research question going to be if you don't know what your problem is. It's better to know your problem first because that will lead you toward your purpose and your research questions, rather than say, the research question is this. Never start with the research question, always start with the problem. Okay, the research questions guide the data collection. They are linked to the problem statement. Again, there's that word, alignment. In qualitative studies, the research questions are not the interview questions. All right, so the interview questions, the ones that you ask of your participants, those are not going to be the same as your research questions. They will line up. In other words, let's say you have a research question that asks, what was the experience of first-generation college students? So your interview question will be, tell us about the first time you entered college. Another question is, help me understand what were some of the emotions that you were going through when you decided to go to college in the first place. So those are interview questions, but your research question should line up with that. All right? Here's an example. Why did the leaders cross the road? This is a research question. That seems too broad. So research question 1, why did the leaders cross the road? Too broad. Here's same question, but too specific. How many leaders crossed the road on July 21st, 2017? That's too specific of a problem or a research question. Here's the best way to put it. What were some of the social and environmental factors that occurred in Seattle, Washington in July 2017 that contributed to CITYU residency students crossing Denny Way? That's a more pointed research question. Now, what's the problem? What do you think the problem was there? Is it the problem that too many people were crossing the road? It could be. There were too many doctoral students at CityU's residency? That'd be great, but that could have been a problem too. So think about it. The research question should align with the problem. Now here's another example, and I want you to think about this. Will leadership training make employees more successful? Will professional development make teachers more effective? That's interesting. That's great. But what do you think? I'll stop and pause here, and if you want to, stop and pause this presentation and discuss that. And so I'll give you a second to do so. Okay, so if you have stopped and paused, then hopefully you had a good discussion. Here's what I want you to do. Add this from the previous slide. We asked, will leadership training make employees successful? Add this. As evidenced by what? Will leadership training make employees more successful at leading their teams as evidenced by the results from the 360 review of employees using the XYZ tool? Will professional development help teachers lead their classes to improve scores on the ABC standardized exams? So again, as evidenced by, you want to make sure you have some sort of criteria for this. Now, talk about good measurements. You want to avoid subjectivity, and you do this by adding as evidenced by. You want to answer the question in definitive terms. Either it is or it's not. And you want to craft clear questions that have objective measures. Objectivity is key. I want to say that just because a study did not reveal what you thought it might, doesn't mean it's a failed study. So if there's no correlation, for example, well, that's a result. That's a good study. It's better to set up the research and have your question answered than have no answers to your research question. Okay? So everyone goes to their dissertation with the suspicion how things are going to work out. And it's okay as long as you are open to things turning out differently. Don't go into your dissertation with the expectation that you want to hear or you expect to hear something. This is a big challenge for dissertation students, is that many of them do their dissertation in their workplace or about their workplace, which is fine, but the challenge is that you're biased in that you have a preconceived notion of how these results will turn up. And I see this a lot in education dissertations with teachers, principals, teacher leaders, that they want to study something very interesting to them, and they should. That's great. It's going to impact their school and their work, but they're too close to it. So don't bend your research results to fit your ideas. It's bias, and it's also unethical. Be open to surprise. So, in summary, problem statements should be clear, concise, and limited. Don't try to solve the problem for the whole world. I have the saying, you cannot boil the ocean, okay? Maybe the sun can, but you can't. The purpose statement. Why are you investigating this problem, and what intervention do you propose to address your problem? That's the purpose statement. And the research questions. What questions do you intend to ask and answer with your research? All three should align. Remember, don't start with the research questions. Start with the problem, because once you know the problem, you can start asking the right questions. If I have seen further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton said this, and so it's a reminder that everything's grounded in research, and build your problems, build your questions from the research. So at this point, I want to stop and thank you, and if you have any questions, to please ask your instructor or whoever's leading the session to address those. You're always welcome to ask me or any one of our faculty here, but I want to thank you for attending this session.